This week on Engage the Sage.
Hi everyone, I'm Don Saucier. Welcome to this week's episode of Engage the Sage. This week we're going to talk about what to do when you're having an off day in class. I love to teach. I hope that you love to teach. Being in class is one of the most fulfilling, wonderful experiences I have in my professional career. Unfortunately, that doesn't mean that every single day is going to be wonderful. There are days when I'm just not connecting with my students. There are days when they're just not engaged in what I'm trying to teach them. And what we're going to talk about today is what to do on those off days. I'm going to begin this with a little example because in case you're wondering, does this really happen to other people because we tend to think this only happens to us? Yes, it does, and it happened to me recently. I was asked to come in and guest lecture in a class on teaching in another department on my campus. So I was coming in to visit. I didn't know the students. I didn't have any rapport with them. They didn't know me, and I was going to come in and tell them about my thoughts on teaching. And I was very excited to do this. Unfortunately, they seemed less excited about this opportunity. I went in and they were not engaged at all in what I was saying. So I was bombing for about 50 minutes. During this time, I was bringing what I considered excellent material. I was telling them about trickle-down engagement. I was talking about the importance of engaging the sage. I referenced this channel. I talked about bringing peace to your classroom. I talked about inclusive teaching practices. I thought I was bringing great stuff that they would be excited about. They were not excited. And in fact, in the 50 minutes that I was there and all of the wonderful information that I could think to tell them about to make their teaching excellent and inclusive, to my knowledge, not a single student wrote down a single thing that I said. While I was there, I wasn't getting the supportive nonverbal contact. They weren't nodding at me when I was talking. They weren't answering my questions. They weren't asking questions. And it was really a situation where I was really kind of put off by the fact that this was going over so poorly, and it started to distract me while I was teaching. Now, the ending to that story is I said, you know what? I'm going to do my best. If they never see me again, if I never have the opportunity to teach with them again, I'm going to demonstrate my teaching persona, my teaching philosophy, my teaching ideas as well as I can. I'm going to be as engaged as I can inspire myself to be in that moment. And if I can reach even one student on one point, I will have had a successful day in the classroom. But to be honest, that was a hard sell to myself in that moment. One of the first things I'm going to say is that if you have one of these experiences, the class is just not going well, either you're not bringing it, they're not bringing it, it's just off that day, is to talk to other people about it afterwards. When you talk to other people about it afterwards, a couple of things are going to happen. Number one, it's going to be easy for you to commiserate with them. It's going to be easy for them to validate your experience because it is likely they will have had some of their own. One of the things that I found after having had this experience is that some of my favorite teaching colleagues were saying, yeah, I've been there. And that really kind of validated me for the experience. The second part, though, is they can now share with you ideas about how to engage in that experience the next time you might have an off day in class. And one of the things I'm going to share with you now is some of the ideas that I have and some of the ideas that I've crowdsourced from some of my colleagues about what to do in the moment when you're having an off day in class. I want to give some shout outs ahead of time. Some of the ideas that I'm sharing are my own. Some of the ideas that I'm sharing have come from excellent colleagues, as I mentioned, and in particular, my colleagues Andy Faber and Beth Pesnell are amazing professors, and some of their ideas are theirs. So one of the first things you can do when you're having that off day in class, you're just not connecting, you're not engaged, they're not engaged, whatever it happens to be, you can literally take a moment to pause and reflect on that situation in class. You can literally just take a minute and say, hey, what's going on today? Doesn't appear like the energy is here. Doesn't appear the engagement in here. What's going on? And have your students actually provide answers to that question. When I'm teaching and my students aren't engaged in what I'm teaching, I'm going to start to draw inferences. I'm going to start to think they're not interested. This is not going well. I'm doing a poor job. I'm going to start to provide the reason for why that class is off. But those reasons might not be the right reason. So asking my students to tell me, what's going on today, I'm going to get some information that might be helpful. When I've had opportunity to do this, one of the answers is, hey, it's October, right? We are in the middle of the semester where I'm teaching right now, and it's just that this is the time of the semester where the responsibilities are starting to pile up, we're starting to have exams and papers, the weather's starting to deteriorate, and that just might be affecting us in ways that leave us a little bit less energetic cognitively and emotionally, and that might create that off day in class. It also might be that your students are confused. Maybe there's something going on early in that class. There's a concept that you didn't quite nail, they didn't quite pick up, and maybe especially on those days when we're fatigued, we got to bring it a little bit more. Maybe you can alleviate some of that confusion to get people back on track. Maybe people are tired and anxious about upcoming projects in your class. These are things you can explore in that moment by asking them, why are we off today? If you anticipate this might be an issue in those October mid-semester type classes, maybe you do that pandemic dictating exercise where you ask them, first name is your predominant emotion, last name is the last food you ate. I did this a little bit earlier in a workshop that I was part of, and almost everybody had some variant of tired and exhausted as their emotion that they were feeling. This might be why everybody seems a little off in that class. And kind of the awesome part about that, that's probably not you. Another reason your students might be a little bit off in that class is they might not be prepared. They may not have done the reading. They might not have done the thinking that they need to do to engage in that topic. So what you're asking them to do is a little bit ambitious given where they are. In that case, and I definitely stole this from Beth Pesnell, you might want to give them what she calls alone zone time. Alone zone time is where you give your students a short period of time, maybe 5 or 10 minutes at the beginning of a class, to review whatever information you're going to be playing with in class that day. Maybe they can reflect on an assignment they just completed, maybe look over a reading, maybe looking over the notes from last class to get them ready to engage. And this might prevent them from seeming off and disengaged when your activities start. Second thing you might want to do when your class is going a little off that day is to really cue and inspire engagement. As I had mentioned in the experience that I was having, when I felt that class going off, I really tried to ramp up my engagement to inspire them to be more engaged with me. It didn't maybe work as well as I wanted it to, but if you've seen this channel at all, I'm a big proponent of trickle-down engagement. And what that means is that the instructor's engagement, especially if it's high, is going to cue higher student engagement and promote better student learning. So if I'm really bringing the engagement, especially when my students don't have it, it's going to be more likely that they're going to come along for the ride. You might want to use engaging cue statements where you tell them, hey, this next thing is really important or really interesting, or this next method is really creative in the study I'm going to share with you. So using those statements to cue engagement might be even more important on those days when things seem a little off. Here is where you might also want to engage them in some active learning tasks. So have them start to play with the information and produce some product for you. Maybe they share with you an experience. Maybe they write a 6-word essay about the content that you're talking about. But get them to play with and share the information might be another way to reinvigorate them in that day. And then when they share those experiences and the demonstrations of the learning, it can provide some inspiration for you to remain engaged in that class. Third thing you can do when class is a little bit off that day is maybe engage in some things to build up your own confidence, maybe even using some positive self-talk. As I mentioned before, we've all had the classes when things are a little bit off. So it is not a unique demonstration of your inability or lack of qualification to teach. So don't let it create that imposter phenomenon for you in that situation. Realize we've all been there and we've all survived the experience. One of my favorite things about teaching is we have so many do-overs. If Tuesday goes poorly, I've got Thursday. If the fall semester goes poorly, I've got the spring semester. We have these opportunities to learn from our experiences and optimize them in the future. So use this as a day to maybe collect some data about what you want to try next time. I think sometimes it's ironic that we as teachers will often promote a growth mindset in our students, but often resort to thinking fixed mindset type things about our teaching. What we can do is we can use those days when we're a little bit off to become better teachers. And as I mentioned before, externalizing some of the blame for why they're off, remembering it's the grumpy time of the semester, for instance, might be something that also provides a little bit of confidence and self-efficacy for you to persevere through that experience. One of the other things that I'm going to recommend that's going to help you when you're having an off day is to try to make sure that those off days are infrequent. Make sure that it is an unusual experience when you're not engaging with your students. If you are palpably showing your engagement, your interest in both the content and your students' learning, if you're showing your students that you care, if you're bringing peace, that preparation, expertise, authenticity, caring, and engagement to every class, then the days that you are off will be unusual. This is something that my lab studies. We do research on students' perceptions of instructor engagement and how it affects their engagement and their learning. One of the coolest effects we found in one of our studies, we had this excellent teacher who was very gracious enough for us to come in and evaluate his class for how engaged they thought he was, how engaged they were, and then how they did on assessments each week over the course of an entire semester. At one point, about 2/3 of the way through the semester, the teacher appeared to have an off day. It appears that the teacher just didn't have it. And that showed up in the students' ratings of that teacher's engagement in that class period. They saw that teacher as not being very engaged that day. What was amazing, though, is the students reported higher engagement themselves that day. What they did is they took on the burden of engaging that class that day, and they made up for the instructor's lack of engagement. And part of what we think was happening there is because that instructor was so highly engaged over the course of the semester and had built such rapport and community in that class, the students had the instructor's back on that instructor's off day. Now, again, don't rely on this too often, but I do think there might be some days when you just don't have it. But if you're used to having it and your students are used to having it, they might be there for you when you don't. And that can inspire you to get back on track. My final recommendation for how to kind of deal with these off days is if you know you're going to have an off day, you know you're going to be physically, emotionally, cognitively unable to bring it in that class, it might be time to enact a contingency plan. If I know today that I am not going to be able to do tomorrow's class justice, maybe what I do is I think about other things to use with that class time. Maybe I find someone else who can guest in that class, do a workshop or a lecture for me. Maybe I can find an activity that my students can do that I can facilitate that takes the onus off me having to lead that education. If it's more extreme than that, maybe I think about actually canceling the class meeting and have them do alternative work during that time on their own. Now, I want to be very clear. I'm not advocating for this contingency plan very often. These are only in those truly unusual circumstances where you really cannot do class. So what I'm talking about today is despite the fact that I love to teach, you love to teach, sometimes it just doesn't go right. And we all have off days sometimes in the classroom. What I think is as long as they don't happen that frequently and as long as we're learning from them, it's actually not that big a deal. And I hope that some of the recommendations that I provided for you and some of the recommendations you're going to get from your colleagues after you commiserate and crowdsource with them are going to help you get through those off days and make them less frequent. And remember, just because you had one off day doesn't mean the next day is not going to be amazing. In the comments below, I want to know how you handle the off days that you have with your class when you're teaching, and I would love to hear you share some experiences of those off days to make all of us feel a little better. For any of you students who are watching this, I would love to see in the comments your experience with off days in the classroom and to give us some advice as instructors about how to make them better for you so that you can keep learning and succeeding. Thank you for watching this episode of Engage the Sage. Please like, subscribe, sign up for notifications, share us on social media, and we'll see you next time on Engage the Sage.